Good evening, friends. Well, it's Friday once again, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the darkness with a story I call Actuator. Taking a drink from my beer, I feel a shiver crawl down my back as the air conditioner vent on the ceiling starts blowing on my neck. I close my eyes for a moment to enjoy the sensation of a cool breeze. It's a nice change from my apartment, where the only thing that blows is the hooker down the hall. But even she doesn't get much business when it's this hot. This has been one of the hottest summers I can remember since I was a kid. Looking over the rim of my frosty mug, I see a big guy sitting toward the back, sipping dark amber liqueur from a brandy snifter. I know it's liqueur and not brandy by the way the syrupy drink leaves a coating on the inside of the glass that catches the light each time he tips it back. I was always of the opinion that only limp-wristed fucks drank brandy and liqueur, but this guy, he's not weak. He looks to be about 40, and though he's dressed in business casual with a white long-sleeve shirt, slacks, and a tie, I can tell he's not at all like the others who frequent this place. To the casual observer, he's just another chubby, middle-aged guy hanging out in a bar looking for some tail. I'm not a casual observer, and there's strength lurking just under the surface of his clean-cut appearance. In my line of work, it's good to be able to read people. There are wisps of silver at the edges of his hair, and the two gray stripes in his goatee look like fangs from this distance. His face doesn't reflect his age, but it's easy to see the wisdom in eyes that have seen hard work and harder times. The fact that he is sitting with his back to the wall in a place which allows him to observe every other part of the bar without having to turn his head is a giveaway. He can see everything while appearing to be looking at nothing. Much the same as my position at the end of the bar on the opposite side of the room. He's looking for something. Setting my mug on the coaster so as not to invoke the wrath of the bartender, I grab a handful of nuts out of the bowl on the bar. My gaze returns to the big guy, and I quickly divert my attention to the waitress wandering the floor. I'm intrigued by the guy, and I think he could be the type to make a good friend. If I had any friends, that is. In my line of work, it's not a good idea to get close to people. "Hey, you want another one?" the bartender asked, picking up my empty mug. I hadn't realized I'd drained the first beer. I guess I was thirsty. I nod and put a 5 spot on the bar as I turn to watch the waitress. "Yeah, thanks." I'm not really interested in the waitress. Not that she's bad looking or anything, but I'm more interested in the people she is serving. She's actually kind of cute with her long dark hair tied back in a loose tail. She's wearing tight slacks, and the lack of panty lines tells me she's wearing a G-string, which is intriguing. Some might speculate that she's wearing no underwear at all, but the conservative cut of her top says she's not the type to go commando. The bartender sets my refilled mug on a fresh coaster and drops my change on the counter next to it. I let it lay. There's enough there for another beer and the bartender's tip. I sip the foam from the beer slowly. I like foam. It reminds me that a beer, unlike a woman, will always give you good head. According to my information, the person I came here to meet should be arriving at any time, and might already be here. By watching the waitress, it just looks like I have a thing for her, and I can locate the subject without drawing suspicion. I prefer to have a good handle on them before they become aware I'm watching them. It gives me time to learn more about them before I make my approach. In my line of work, knowing everything you can about the other guy can give you an advantage. I watch the waitress as she delivers drinks to a party of 3 business types from the financial district. One of them slips a bill into the waistband of her slacks and squeezes her ass. She plays it off cool, grabbing the bill and slipping it into her receipt folder as she smiles and goes to the next customer. She's not about to risk her job over something like this. I feel anger rising at his disrespect. If he wants to paw the women and slip money in their panties, he ought to carry his ass down to the dance joints on the strip where that kind of thing is expected. This is a respectable joint, and he ought to feel lucky that Tony's not working the bar tonight. He would have thrown his ass out in a heartbeat without letting him finish the drink he paid for. Tony owns the joint, and it's a quiet place, where guys in business suits gather to talk about their latest deals as they try to hook up with the women they work with. Quite respectable, and not the sort of place where being rude is easily tolerated. Tonight is Tony's night off, so this guy gets a break. I like Tony. He's another of those guys that would make a good friend, and I try to patronize his establishment at least once a week. Always dressed in a suit, he sets the tone for the atmosphere of this place, and everybody knows it's Tony's place without even having to read the sign over the bar. You would never guess that tonight he's off playing poker with a bunch of cops and businessmen like he does every week. I kinda envy Tony and his friends. Not that I want cops for friends, but it would be nice to be able to unload on a friend every once in a while. He's one of those guys that can easily mingle with any crowd, but deep down, he's from the streets like the rest of us. In my line of work, it's good to know people. It's still early and I'm starting to feel hungry, so I flag down the bartender and order a plate of chicken wings. The waitress will tell me when they're ready and lead me to a table near the televisions where I can watch the game or the news while I eat if I want. Just another of the amenities that makes this place special. Following the waitress movements around the room, I check out the patrons. Mostly regulars, with the odd out-of-town visitor, and no sign of the guy I'm looking for. I am bored. I do not have anything else to do on a hot night like this except sit in front of the tube drinking cold beer, but I absolutely detest waiting on people. At least if I was at home, I could shed this hot jacket and sit around in my shorts comfortably. I reach for the fresh beer and take another look around the room. The big guy is taking out a small notepad and pen and is writing something now. He seems quite captivated by whatever he's writing and doesn't seem to notice the three guys next to him have grown a bit louder since the last round. It stirs my curiosity. What would a guy have to write about when he's by himself in a bar? In a restaurant, I could see it if he was doing a review, but here? He looks up for a moment and smiles right at me before lifting his snifter to the waitress to order another round. I knew he was more than he seemed. Here I thought he was absorbed in whatever he was writing, but obviously he was still aware that my gaze had drifted his way. I tried to let it go, but something about that guy is familiar and I just cannot place it. I feel like I know him, but I know we've never spoken. In my line of work, it's good to remember who people are. A sudden burst of energy at the business trio table gets my attention. I look to see the guy who grabbed the waitress' ass has just stuck a bill in her blouse. It's not a low-cut blouse, and obviously his fingers did not stop at the edge of the V-collar by her reaction. She's stumbling back toward the big guy with several beers still on her tray, and I'm helpless as I watch her fall. In an instant, a meaty paw shoots out from the big guy's table, and he catches her as she sits on his hand with her back resting against his forearm. Her wrist moves this way and that to stabilize the beers on the tray, and she does not even spill a drop. He does not even budge as her whole weight settles on his hand, and I'm pleased to know I was right about him. He's not weak. He gently pushes her back to her feet, saying something I cannot hear, and watches her move away to serve the rest of her drinks. He takes a drink and, setting the snifter back on the table, gets up and walks over to the business trio table. I see his big hands settle on the pile of cash in the center of the table, and by the looks on their faces, there is no mistaking the intent of his words. They quickly gather themselves and head for the door, and I have to wonder just what he said to provoke such a reaction. He counts the money on the table, leaving half for the waitress, and puts the rest in his pocket before sitting down. The waitress comes over to tell me my wings are ready, and I decline a table, choosing instead to eat them here at the bar where I can watch the door. She sets the platter in front of me and waits patiently for her money. I put in a couple extra bucks for her. "Can I ask a question?" I ask quietly. "Sure thing, honey," she says, smiling. "What you need?" "Well, I was just wondering, what'd that big guy say to you?" She half laughs and half giggles as she leans closer. "Would you believe he said, 'Pardon me'?" Like I was gonna mind, he kept me from falling. I laugh a little and watch as she turns away to continue her rounds. The big guy has class. She hits his hand with her ass and he says, "Pardon me." I like him. Looking at her ass, I kinda envy him as well. The wings are good with just enough barbecue sauce to have great flavor but not be real messy. In a social situation like this, I would really prefer to use silverware, but it's nearly impossible to use silverware to eat bone-in chicken wings. A steaming pile of golden fries accompanies the wings, and before long I'm a very satisfied customer, pushing away a plate of bones. I finish off the beer and focus my attention back to the room. Several people came in while I was eating, but I did not look to see who. When I eat, I prefer to enjoy the meal and not worry about other things. Now that I was done, it's time to get back to business. I lift my mug to the bartender for a fresh beer and turn my attention to the waitress once again. In my line of work, separating business and pleasure is something that must be done. She's serving two young couples that came in and took a table near the center of the room while I was eating. Wine for the ladies and liquor on the rocks for the guys. The way they are seated tells me a lot about them. Even though they're clearly here as a group, they are newly married, or at least well-established couples, because the girls are sitting side by side, as are the men. This tells me that they're still not quite secure in their relationships, as they have all sat in such a way as to ensure that no man has access to both ladies, nor does either lady have access to both guys. The big guy is still writing in his notepad. He looks up occasionally to see what's happening around the room, but does not seem overly concerned about anyone in particular. The table next to him has been cleaned up, and it sits vacant, waiting for the next group that comes in the door. I notice he's writing with a bit more of a flourish now, and attribute this to the alcohol, as well as a strong flow of thoughts, which he is seeking to capture. I wonder if it will still be as interesting in the morning. Conversation in the room has risen to a dull, throbbing roar just below the level of the music coming from the speakers on the ceiling. People are loosening up, forgetting the cares of the day, and starting to have a good time. On the other hand, aside from being happy with my full belly, I'm getting more bored as I wait for my contact. I'm starting to wonder if maybe he will not show this evening, and that's the real downer, because it means I'll have to look him up in the morning. Morning. A time best left for sleeping, in my opinion, unless you're going fishing, which I haven't done in years. The cool hours after dawn are the best for sleeping because you're not awakened by irritating beads of sweat traveling across your face. As the morning wears on and the heat rises, it's easier to face the day well rested. If I have to get up and get sweaty to talk to this guy, I might lose my cool. The heat does that to me. I don't understand why, but my temper is much shorter when I'm hot and uncomfortable. It would be best if we met tonight to say what needed said. In my line of work, keeping your cool is a good thing. The bell over the door rings as another customer comes in, and my mood is lifted. My contact has arrived, and he is alone. He's wearing a dark tan suit with a white shirt, black shoes, and the ugliest tie I've ever seen. The tie seems to have been rescued from the age of disco and has a life of its own. Sparkle patterns and airbrush sweeps of neon color on a bluish-black background. If for no other reason, I would not like this guy simply because of his taste in clothes. I turn my eyes back to the waitress to avoid gaining his attention. Though I'm looking directly at the waitress as she makes her rounds, I'm watching the guy in the corner of my eye. After a cursory look around, he headed for the men's room and is now standing just outside the door, trying to decide where to sit. He sees the table where the business trio sat, but seems somewhat intimidated when he notices the big guy. Why, I don't know, because he's one of the friendliest looking people in the place. I'm surprised when he walks directly across the bar and sits next to me. "Hey bartender, can I get a light beer please?" he asks, waving a bill above the bar. I shudder at the thought of light beer and send a silent apology across to the big guy for earlier thoughts of brandy and liqueur. Light beer is nasty, like drinking watered down apple juice. I take a deep drink of my draft to wash the thought of the taste of light beer out of my mouth. The bartender sets a beer glass and a dark brown beer bottle with a silver label in front of the guy, and I am disgusted. He pours the beer into the glass slowly from the side to keep it from creating suds, and sets the bottle on the bar. "Here's to good health," he says, and takes a drink. I turn my head away and think of something else to get the idea of drinking light beer out of my mind. I need to talk to this guy, and his beer is making me want to leave. Even the smell is like weak piss in the urinals. "How can you drink that?" I ask firmly. He looks at my mug and back to his beer. "You mean light beer?" "Yeah. How can you drink that?" I finish my mug and order another. "Honestly, I prefer the taste of a good draft like you're drinking, but don't want to get a beer gut. No offense," he says, looking down. I look down at my gut. I can still see my belt buckle, and I'm not overly heavy. Looking at him, he's skinny and looks like he could use about 50 pounds of groceries. None taken. I smile and grab the fresh beer, thinking how easy it would be to swat his light beer drinking ass like a fly. "By the way, I'm James," he says, holding out a hand. I set my beer down and shake his hand. "Mike." "Nice to meet you, Mike," he says and finishes his beer. "Yeah, same here," I say noncommittally. "Let me buy you another beer." He holds up a bill to the bartender. "Barkeep, let us get 2 more of what my friend is drinking." On one hand, I'm surprised he's going to drink the same beer as I am, while on the other, it's simply a confirmation of the profile I've already developed about him. He's a follower, doomed to work the rest of his life in a cubicle doing whatever somebody else tells him to. If he had a wife, he would wear the panties. "So what kind of work do you do, Mike?" he asks, taking a drink of the draft. "I'm a tertiary actuator for the collections department of an investment firm," I said with a smile. Inside, I'm laughing. I've practiced this line for a long time because it's a way of telling the truth about what I do without actually letting anybody know what I do. I learned a long time ago it's much easier to maintain yourself by telling the truth whenever possible, because in my line of work, getting caught in a lie is tantamount to early retirement. It also does not hurt to have a job title that fits with what the guys I have to talk to are used to hearing. Since most of them work in banking and investments, the job title I give sounds like just another fancy name for paper pusher. It puts them at ease so their guard is down when it's time to close the deal, because in my line of work, I close the deals. My employer started out as a bail bondsman who found a few neat ways to get ahead. First, he adapted the business to allow him to make high-interest, short-term loans on the side. Since he already had bounty hunters on the payroll, it was a small step for them to make a little extra cash acting as collection agents. Then, after losing a chunk of cash after a bond skipped, he decided to prevent future loss by taking an indemnity policy on each bond. In the event a bond skipped and was unrecoverable, insurance took the hit. One thing led to another, and it was not long before he found a way to cover loans in the same way. That's where I come in. If somebody tries to skip out on a loan or doesn't make their deadline, I close the deal to bring the policy into effect. My boss gets his money back with interest, and I make a decent living. Everybody's happy. "Really? What a coincidence," he smiled. "I close deal on investments. What a rush. I tell you, sometimes when I watch the market waiting for a trend to sell, it gets intense." "I imagine it does," I say offhand. I don't play the market and feel it's no different from gambling in a casino, just slower. To me, gambling is just a way to lose money unless you're in the know about the outcome, and then you're not gambling but cheating the honest gamblers. I've always said casinos are in it to make money, not to make you money. "Oh man, let me tell you about the latest." He was really excited now. "I knew of a small company that was getting off the ground, and I heard about what they were going to release, and it was absolutely sure it would do well. So I got this idea to invest in it, while the price was low, before I told my clients. You know, make sure I could get in on the lowest possible price before demand caused prices to increase." I was hardly listening to him as I really did not care about stocks or gambling, but I kept nodding at the right places so as not to seem rude. In my line of work, it's good to be able to appear interested when you're not. What I was really paying attention to was the two couples that came in earlier. One of the guys had gone off to the restroom, and the one left behind was making time with both women. Well, I looked at my savings, but I knew I didn't have enough to really make a killing, so I decided to take a high-risk loan from this place I know of. Actually, a buddy told me about it. He stopped and took a drink of his beer. I turned my attention back to him now at the sound of high-risk loan. It sounded like he was about to tell me a story about why he was late on his contract. Did he know I was meeting him here tonight to close the deal? Anyway, I knew I needed to buy about twice what I had in the bank worth to make any real money, but a loan of that side would have a serious chunk of return. He laughed and turned to me. So you know what I did? I borrowed the money I needed to make the buy and left my money in the bank. This way, if I was forced to sell the stock in order to make the loan repayment and didn't have enough to cover the interest, at least I would have my savings to save my ass. The only way I could possibly lose is if the stock took a dive and I lost my investment. So, did the stock take a dive? I asked curiously. It seemed as though he had a good idea, and for the first time I was actually interested in why someone failed to meet the deadline. The bartender called last call and I held up my mug for a refill. No, that's the thing. He took a long slug from the beer and slid the glass across the bar. I made a killing. I made 10 times my initial investment. Sounds like you hit on a good thing, I said, confused. So where's the intensity in that? Oh man, let me tell you. I watched that stock climb and I knew I was making a killing. The higher it went, the more I was worth. And I didn't want to sell it off too soon. He paid the bartender for another beer and drank some before he went on. I waited until 3 days before I had to pay the loan off, watching the price of the stock climbing the whole time, and at the last minute, I put it back on the sale floor. I watched the guy from the couples table return and sit down next to his girl. He had no idea what was going on while he was out of the room, and she gave no clues. What they don't tell you about the stock market is the point of maximum anxiety is waiting for someone to buy your shares before the price starts to drop. In my case, it was even more intense because I knew I had to cover that loan as well. Man, it had me going. The bartender turned on the house lights and announced the bar was closed. I finished my beer and stood up for the first time in hours. My legs felt a little shaky, but I got them under control pretty quick. You want to share a cab while you finish that story? I asked, not intending to let him slip away. In my line of work, a cab is considered a business expense. Thanks, but I only live a couple blocks from here, he said, standing in and pushing his stool in. I'll see you in here again and we can finish. No way, man, I said, professing interest in his story. I want to hear the rest of the story. He seemed pleased that someone actually wanted to talk to him and led the way to the door. Stepping from the air-conditioned confines of the bar, the heat of the night slammed me like a brick wall. I could feel the effects of the beer, but was only slightly buzzed, so I knew it'd be no trouble to do what needed done. We walked across the front of the bar and he turned us into the alley. So like I was saying, he continued, here I was, hours away from having to pay back the loan and I was still waiting for a buyer for my stocks. He stopped talking suddenly and turned to grab the edge of a dumpster. I guess the draft beer didn't agree with him because the next thing I knew, he was blowing chunks all over the side of the trash dumpster and back on his shoes. When he finished, he began to wipe his mouth with that ugly tie. I like things clean. Even when I close a deal, it's clean and unlikely to be perceived as such. It's my trademark and I'm very good at it. I have to be, especially when the insurance companies are looking closely. The last thing my boss wants is questions raised when he's looking for the payout. Seeing my chance, I decided it was time to close the deal. In one smooth movement, I grabbed the back of his jacket, slammed his throat into the edge of the dumpster, crushing his windpipe, and pulled him backward hard. His head hit the pavement with a dull thud, knocking him cold before he was even aware that he was choking to death. His body tightened in spasm for a moment, and then all was still. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. To anyone coming upon him laying here, it would seem a drunk slipped in his own mess and hit his throat. A tragic accident. I leaned down for a moment and checked to ensure he was not going to recover, and then checked his jacket pockets quickly. Sometimes the clients would leave me a nice tip, and I'm not above a little extra. I find a small roll of bills and a piece of paper in his wallet. It's an open cashier's check for $250 large. Nice tip. I tuck it in my pocket and turn away. Walking to the end of the alley, I spotted a payphone and crossed the street to it. The first call was to the cab company to arrange a ride, and the second to my boss. "The deal is closed," I said and hung up the telephone. "In my line of work, that's the sound of payday." Well, there it is, friends. Thank you for choosing to spend your time listening to me. Leave a comment and I'll be sure to join in the conversation. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you want to hear more, hit subscribe and the bell icon so you'll be notified when I post. Until next time, sleep well and have a good night.